Brandon.
Hey, Governor.
Okay, you're in an undisclosed location.
I'm in the other Portland, Maine.
All right, here we go. Come to order. Controller Wolf.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor, members of the board. For the record, we have Governor Little, Attorney General Labrador, and Secretary of State McGrain. On our Board of Examiners agenda today, we have our consent agenda. Includes the minutes from last month of February. Item number 2 is from the Office of Emergency Management. This is a liquid propane leak in Canyon County. Item number 3 is from the Department of Health and Welfare. This is a quarterly routine request that requests $231,037,500 be transferred from the general fund to the Cooperative Welfare Fund during the fourth quarter of fiscal year 23 in accordance to appropriation. Item number 4 is from the Department of Environmental Quality. This is 3 specific requests. One is to transfer $2,760,400 from the general fund to the Department of Environmental Quality Fund during the fourth quarter. Item number 2 is to transfer $200,000 from the Air Quality Permitting Fund to the DEQ Fund Quality. And item number 3 is to transfer $369,900 to be transferred from the Public Water System Supervision Fund to the DEQ Fund during the fourth quarter. And with that, Governor, members of the board, that concludes the consent agenda.
Motion.
Move to accept.
All right,
Second.
been moved and second. We accept the consent agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The consent agenda has been adopted. Controller.
Thank you, Governor, members of the board. On our regular agenda, we have from the State Treasurer's Office an action item. This is to request authorization pursuant to Idaho Code 63-3201 to issue tax anticipation notes that will not exceed 75% of the anticipated income or revenue from taxes during fiscal year 24. And I believe bond counsel Stephanie Bonney is there. I don't think Julie Ellsworth is there, but Stephanie is there to speak regarding this. And if approved, she does need signatures from you today.
Do we anticipate that we're going to anticipate taxes? Julie, I guess she's going to answer your question for you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm
Briefly.
Okay. That determination.
Yes or no would be a good answer.
We won't know till mid-April, Governor.
Okay. All right. And for the new members of the board, that means that if the treasurer decides we need to go issue bonds and tax anticipation, they will come back and we'll all have to sign off on it. Is that correct?
That is correct,
All right.
Governor.
Okay.
I guess, Governor, just for a question. So what will we be signing today if we're going to be signing for the tax anticipation notes later?
Would you like me to answer
Yes,
that, sir?
please.
Thank you, Governor. Mr. Secretary, so the purpose of today's resolution is to just authorize that tax anticipation note. Now, I will note that you'll see a very large number here. However, the IRS also further limits that to 90% of the anticipated deficit. The purpose of the note is to reconcile the timing of payments and tax receipts, primarily due to payments to the
90%
school
or
district.
75%?
Pardon me?
90 or 75?
75% of the anticipated revenue is that state code. IRS further limits it to 90% of the anticipated deficit.
Okay.
So
I'm familiar
generally,
with the tax anticipation notes. So
Okay.
yeah, I'm fine.
and then that determination, as I told the governor earlier, is made mid-April when the state treasurer's office has a better grasp of what the anticipated deficit, if any, will be.
All right. Further questions? Motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move that we authorize the treasurer's office to, I guess, to pursue the tax anticipation notes.
Very good. Second?
Second.
Moved and seconded that the treasurer be authorized to pursue, anticipate, perhaps doing tax anticipation. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. And the regular agenda has been adopted. Informational agenda.
Governor and members of the board, on the informational agenda, there's item number 6 from the State Controller's Office. This is just a report of the monthly overtime exemption for FLSA exempt employees. And item number 7 is from the State Insurance Fund, another monthly update. And that concludes our informational agenda for today.
Thank you, Controller. A motion.
To adjourn.
Then move that we adjourned. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We are adjourned. We got about a minute before we start the land board. Absolutely.
Good. Thanks. Secretary.
Yeah, good to see you, Stephanie.
There you go. All right, Board of Land Commissioners will come to order. Bill,
Good morning.
welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Governor and members of the Land Board. And for the record, I am Bill Hoganson, the Deputy Director for IDL, sitting in for Director Miller today. If with your permission, Governor, we do have a group of new employees or relatively new employees here today. Part of our onboarding process is for them to have the opportunity to attend a Land Board meeting. So if it's all right, I'd ask them to stand up briefly so we can recognize them. It's a large group today.
Welcome.
Welcome. Are you sure it's an opportunity, Bill?
For those of you that don't know, one of my predecessor called this the Land Board, B-O-R-E-D. Welcome.
So thank you, Governor and members of the Land Board. Today, we did make a change to the agenda to begin with the regular agenda items. And so the first item on the agenda is the Brisbee LLC land exchange for final approval. And that will be presented by Zane Latham, who's a program specialist in our Real Estate Services Bureau.
Welcome.
Thank you, Deputy Director. Good morning, Governor, members of the Land Board. For the record, my name is Zane Latham. I'm a real estate specialist for the Idaho Department of Lands. The question posed is, shall the Land Board authorize the department to complete the land exchange with Brisbee LLC? Thank you.
Can you, can the other board members hear? Is the audio good? Can you hear?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
The department is seeking approval to complete the Brisbee land exchange. As counsel for the proponent, Mr. Jeff Bauer of Givens Pursley is with us here today and available to answer any questions that the Land Board may have for him. On September 20th, 2022, the Land Board approved the due diligence phase of this project. This project would exchange 205 acres of public school mineral estate on former endowment land located in Ada County for fee title to 125 acres of timberland that the proponent has a contractual option to purchase in Shoshone County. After receiving approval to perform due diligence, the department completed MAI appraisal reports and MAI appraisal review reports for both properties. The Brisbee land in Shoshone County was valued at $1 million using the sales comparison approach. Also, the timber on the property has been evaluated by the department's Timber Bureau. The Timber Bureau has the following to say about the Brisbee property. Quote, this acquisition will accelerate the harvest of IDL's current asset, removing over-mature stands and replacing them with newly regenerated stands that will improve long-term productivity. The property had a recent pre-commercial thinning and no further investments will be necessary until the next rotation, end quote. The public school endowment mineral estate was reserved to the state of Idaho upon conveyance of the surface rights from the state to private ownership in 1940 and 1937. The mineral estate appraised for $6,400, mainly due to the very low possibility of oil and gas deposits. The reserved mineral estate does not include sand and gravel or geothermal resources. The state has never leased the subject mineral estate. The market value of the Brisbee land is $993,600 higher than that of the endowment land. Brisbee intends to donate the difference in market value to the public school endowment. While the market value of the mineral estate is very low in comparison with the Brisbee property, the unique recognized value of a consolidated estate and the perfection of title to Brisbee is relevant and important when considering whether this exchange is an even value land exchange. The recognized value to Brisbee LLC is such that they consider the property rights involved in this land exchange to be equitable, even though the difference in market value will be treated as a donation to the endowment. The department also completed title investigations for both properties, access review, threatened and endangered species review, and an environmental site assessment for the Brisbee land. The final component of the due diligence was a third-party due diligence review performed by the land board's real estate advisor, Michael Finch of Century Pacific. The review completed by Mr. Finch recommends completing the land exchange and notes, quote, exchanging the endowment property for the Brisbee property, a contiguous 125-acre timberland property, appears to be financially and operationally advantageous to the state of Idaho. The proposed exchange appears to be accretive to the land board and affords the exchanging parties to derive unique value due to the characteristics of the property exchange, location, access, contiguity, perfection of title, etc. Century Pacific is of the opinion that the proposed land exchange is beneficial to the land board, end quote. Acquisition of the Brisbee property would help block up existing endowment lands and allow for more efficient management of the ownership in the area. There are approximately 3,500 acres of endowment land in the immediate vicinity of this parcel that use the same road system for hauling forest products. The property would provide access across 2,600 feet of roadway to approximately 1,100 acres of current endowment timberland. Certified letters were sent to all the adjacent landowners, but none of them replied with comments. This project was also presented to both Shoshone and Ada County commissioners in October of 2022. Shoshone County commissioners cited their concerns regarding the loss of tax revenue. However, they did not submit a letter in opposition to the proposed land exchange. Ada County commissioners take a neutral stance on the proposed land exchange because it will not have a negative effect on the tax base in Ada County. In summary, benefits of this exchange to the endowment include blocking up existing endowment lands, improved access opportunities for existing endowment lands, an increase in overall endowment acres, and finally, the $993,600 of added value to the public school endowment due to Brisbee's donation of the difference in market value. For these reasons, the department recommends that the land board approve the Brisbee land exchange. And with that, I will stand for any questions.
Questions? Can you, so we make way more money off of sand and gravel, the state does, we do off anything. At the end of this today, and at the end of this process, where will the sand and gravel rights be?
For the governor, members of the land board, for the Brisbee property, we don't own sand and gravel rights on that property. At the time that property.
So when it was conveyed, the sand and mineral went with the fee or went with the bundle of sticks in the original sale.
We didn't
Okay,
reserve
right.
sand and gravel at that
Okay.
point.
Do we know of all the, just for my edification, of all the, if you look at a map of Idaho and there's lots of mineral rights out there the state still has, for the most part, we just kept the precious mineral and the oil and gas rights, and the sand and gravel went with the land when it was disposed of, traded, fill in the blank.
Governor, members of the land board, that's my understanding.
Okay.
There was a break over a year
All right.
when we did start
Okay.
reserving.
Thank
those.
you.
Yep.
I have a question.
General,
So I'm new to the land board, obviously, and this just doesn't make any sense to me. You spent a great deal of time explaining to us why it's beneficial to the state to acquire the property in the north, but why would we give this up? And there's always hidden costs. So what's going to be the hidden cost to the state to actually convey these mineral rights and other things? What's the tax? You claim that there's going to be a tax benefit to the conveyor. It just seems like such an uneven exchange that there's something missing that we're not hearing about, it seems like almost like a trick to me. So I'm trying to figure this out.
Governor, Mr. Attorney General, member of the Land Board. Brisbee LLC is a landholding entity for Meta, more commonly known as Facebook. Meta is constructing a large data center at considerable expense. I've heard in hundreds of millions of dollars worth of a facility going in out there. Brisbee's mission is to provide a property with the certainty of full fee title to Meta for the construction of the facility. Brisbee feels that the certainty of a consolidated estate on their property in Ada County is equitable with the value of the land that they're trading to us.
Follow up.
Good.
So what is the cost? First of all, what's going to be the cost to the state in tax benefits when for this once this is acquired? How much is the state going to be paying out in tax benefits and things to either Meta or because of the land exchange?
Governor, Mr. Attorney General, I'm going to defer that question to the Deputy Director.
Good morning,
Bill?
Governor and Mr. Attorney General. In terms of the lands that we would acquire, the tax impact to the county for 125 acres, typically timberland would be taxed in the range of $3 to $4 per acre per year. So it's a relatively minor impact to the county where we would be acquiring lands. The tax impacts on the acquired parcel in Ada County, I cannot answer how they will be taxed moving forward under that ownership.
Okay. And another follow-up. So we don't know what those tax implications, but what is the state going to be giving this company in benefits once they acquire all this land and they start building? Because we always hear about the economic impact, but there's always a cost to the state when we give tax benefits and other things to large corporations. Do we know what that benefit's going to be?
Governor, Mr. Attorney General, again, I'm going to defer to the Deputy Director.
Governor and Mr. Attorney General, another difficult question for the department to answer because it's outside of our domain, not under our control. What happens with other benefits or tax issues related to the future of that data center?
All right. Thank you.
Let me try and Bill, and you can kind of get me back in line if I get out in far field. But the issue is all over the state of Idaho, ever since we originally had 3.5 million, now we have 2.5 million. There's, I don't know how many acres, maybe Mick knows, that we have split a state on. And which was a policy, which is interesting because part of the time we disposed of land, we disposed of it fee simple. Part of the time we kept the mineral rights. It was not consistent all the time. The issue here is this is a very large capital intensive project. And what's happened in other areas is somebody will come in from outside by the mineral rights. And then this is probably a word that I shouldn't use, but the purchaser of those mineral rights will extort money out of the person doing the capital project as a way to either politically stop it or to extort money out of them, either one of them. But that has been the case in other areas where people have bought land and they didn't have the entire bundle of sticks of land ownership. And then somebody else came and got it and either for political reasons wanted to stop it or for financial reasons wanted to extort money out of them. You are both correct. This looks like a really unbalanced exchange. That if that doesn't, your instincts are right that this thing flies off the Richter scale as being unbalanced. But the reason it's unbalanced, it would be different if it was Brad Little that was going to run cows on it. I wouldn't care if somebody was going to extort money out of it. But if it's a, I don't know what it is, a $500 million project, fill in the blank, it's a big project. They are paying, and that's why they're donating part of the value back. They are paying an ample sum to have the surety that there's nobody that can stop their project. Bill, do you have any, did I get far afield?
Governor, I think you addressed that certainly better than I can. Thank you.
And I think, but your instincts, General, are exactly right. This thing is not, if we were on the other side of it, somebody'd say, we'll give you the mineral rights to a piece of ground you can't develop the land on for 200 acre, 150 acres of timberland, we'd go, you must think I'm a damn fool. But I'm certain that in this issue, that is the case. But we're going to see more of those because of that underlining mineral rights and how people see it as a way to, and you know, the land board, we don't, you know, they could show up here and we would be forced under our constitutional mandate to have an auction for those mineral rights. And it would slow down the process. And if you're doing a big capital project, speed matters. So.
I guess that leads to one, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. No, finish
One
it.
more follow-up. And maybe it says in here and I just didn't catch it. So the state owns the who owns the mineral rights and who owns the land right now? I think I understand, but I want to.
Governor, Mr. Attorney General,
Mhm.
the state of Idaho owns the mineral rights on the 205 acre parcel in Ada County,
Mhm.
and Jamestown Forest Lands owns the 125 acres of timber.
No, I apologize. We own the mineral rights,
We own the mineral
but
rights.
who owns the actual?
Surface rights.
Brisbee,
They're-
Brisbee LLC.
So
owns
they
this-
already own
Yeah,
that.
yeah, they own the surface rights. Yes,
That's
sir. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's your instincts, both of your instincts are right. It just doesn't pass the smell test until you see what's happened in other areas, how people have used it as a way to, and we're going to have more of that because the state has a substantial amount of mineral rights in areas that, you know, areas all over. And you always hear about somebody coming in and buying the mineral rights and then extorting money or using it as a way to stop a project. So, other
Governor,
questions? Go ahead.
Governor, I think just, obviously you've alluded to my concerns. When I've gone through extensively through this, and it is the equity question, it just seems, I think it was good that you presented it, that realistically it appears more as a donation. I'm inclined to support it because clearly it's in the best interest of the beneficiaries to add an additional 125 acres. Looking back at the meeting minutes from September, it felt more equitable because it didn't talk about the relative values. You just saw 125 acres versus 205 acres of mineral rights. Whereas now, once we have the appraisals and we're looking at it now, it is well over 100 times difference. I can appreciate where having fee simple title is valuable to the landowner in this case. So it just, when you look at the law and the Constitution as it relates to land exchanges, it infers a sense of equity. Obviously, it's to make sure that the beneficiaries aren't duped in any way in any of these exchanges. But this, again, just as you alluded to it, the smell test,
Well,
it does seem very beneficial to the state, but it just also seems strange. So
well, occasionally, Mr. Secretary, when we're doing these, given the appraisals, I don't think we're getting a good deal. So we get a good deal, we ought to get it to make up for some of those other ones that aren't such a good deal. And Bill's laughing at me. So further questions? Either one of you? Yeah, Controller Wolf, go ahead.
Thank you, Governor, and thank you for the discussion. I'm looking at attachment 3, and my eyes are kind of a little bit colorblind, but on the exchange parcel, does that border up to some of our other state land, or is that other U.S. Forest Service land?
Mr. Latham.
Governor, Mr. Controller, members of the land board, the Brisbee property that we'll be trading into is bordered on the east and west sides by existing endowment land.
Okay. And I guess for a comment, Governor, and I think we have, I appreciate the good questions and the dialogue. I think that's very helpful. And I think in the one thing from the Western watersheds is that we have to take into consideration only what's the best interest of the beneficiaries. We can't take into account anything else. So having to stick with that from previous land board decisions over the past. So thank you for that good discussion.
Thank you. Superintendent, have you got a question?
No questions. I, like everyone else, appreciate the discussion and the understanding that as someone that owns land, you would have a reasonable expectation that you would own everything that belongs within that parcel of land. And so this seems fair and reasonable.
All right. With that, we're open for a motion.
I would so move. I don't have an official motion in front of me, but I guess we're approving IDL to move forward with the exchange. Is that what you want the motion to be?
Yeah, I think superintendent approve the exchange and direct the department to complete and close the as proposed Brisbee LLC land exchange. That's what the bottom line. Did I get that right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
There's
second
the
that.
motion.
Been moved and seconded. Further discussion.
Governor, just for discussion, as I mentioned, I'm going to support the motion, but recognizing we have, I guess, in my mind, both a land exchange as well as a sizable donation to the endowment, which I think is in the best interest of the beneficiaries.
Okay. Other questions? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, nay.
Nay.
The ayes have it. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Governor and members of the land board. The second item is the proposed Benoit land exchange. And what this one is approval to conduct due diligence. And Zane Latham will present this one as well.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
We've missed you.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Director. Good morning, Governor, members of the Land Board. Again, for the record, my name is Zane Latham. I'm a real estate specialist for the Idaho Department of Lands. The question posed is, shall the Land Board authorize the department to proceed with the due diligence for the proposed land exchange? The department is seeking approval to perform due diligence for the Benoit County land exchange. Benoit County Commissioner Robert Short is participating remotely and available to answer any questions the land board may have for him. In February 2022, the department received an application for a land exchange from Benoit County, care of Commissioner Robert Short, which would trade approximately 120 acres of county-owned timberlands for approximately 60 acres of School of Science and owned endowment lands. All the lands involved in the proposed land exchange are located in Benoit County. The approximately 60 acres of School of Science endowment land proposed for the exchange are located 9 miles south of St. Mary's in Benoit County. The endowment land involved in this exchange is not contiguous. The property includes a 20-acre parcel fronting State Highway 3, commonly known as the rodeo grounds, and a nearby 40-acre parcel containing 5 acres of regenerative young timber and a 5-acre rock quarry. There are currently 3 leases on the endowment land involved in the exchange. Benoit County has a mineral lease pertaining to the rock quarry, which will be canceled if the land exchange is completed. The Upriver Saddle Club currently leases the rodeo grounds. I spoke to Bob Short about that, Benoit County Commissioner, and he's indicated to me that the county will establish a lease with Upriver or some other kind of land use agreement so that Upriver can continue to use the arena after the exchange is completed. The third lease is an outfitter and guide lease. It applies to the 40-acre parcel containing the rock parcel or the rock quarry, pardon me, but it's also covers like 31,000 acres of additional land in several other counties. So it's a little teeny piece of a larger lease for the outfitter guide lease. We'll make sure the department will work with the lessees and make sure that they're treated fairly and equitably throughout the process. The county's lands are 15 miles south of St. Mary's in Benoit County and the Tyson Creek drainage, where IDL manages 9,000 acres of core endowment timberlands. The Benoit County land is stocked with mature timber and is surrounded on all sides by existing endowment land, timberlands. Acquisition of the county timberland by IDL would help block up lands and allow for more efficient management of the ownership in the area. The property would also improve access across to surrounding existing endowment timberland. We expect the return on investment to be greater on the county timberlands when compared to the current revenue of the subject endowment land, but we will have to complete the due diligence process to confirm the return on investment. The department and Benewah County desire an equal value land exchange with a maximum of 10% difference in land values. This may require some balancing of the properties as we get into this during the due diligence process, whereby more or less land that has been previously stated may ultimately be exchanged by either party. Any necessary balancing of the land involved in this proposed land exchange will take place during the appraisal process. The department and the county have agreed to split the cost of due diligence evenly between both parties if the land board approves moving forward with the proposed land exchange. Upon approval by the land board, the department will complete the following due diligence items. Again, we'll notify neighboring property owners of the proposed exchange by certified mail, provide an opportunity for them to provide comments. We'll order a preliminary title report to review the legal descriptions and current title exceptions on the properties. We will complete a phase 1 environmental site assessment to review the environmental history of the county timber property. We will verify that both the properties have legal access. The properties with merchantable timber may require a timber cruise to determine the species, quality, and quantity of harvestable timber. Sufficient data must be obtained to create a statistically reliable sample for the timber modeling. We will review the property for any existence of any endangered or threatened or endangered species. And then we will have real estate appraisals will be completed by a member of the Appraisal Institute and to determine the market value for each property. Appraisals will then be reviewed by a second MAI appraisal to verify the report meets uniform standards of professional appraisal practice. We'll also review any recorded surveys, verify survey pins are placed at the corners, and determine if there is a need to order another or a new survey. And then we'll also have that third party due diligence review when we're done. Based on the review of the due diligence, the department leadership will approve or terminate the land exchange for further consideration. If the department leadership approves, the proposed exchange will be brought back to the land board for final approval to complete the transaction. The department recommends the land board approve proceeding with due diligence for the Benewah County land exchange proposal. With that, I will stand for any questions.
Questions? And all the motion is, when we get there, is just for the department to proceed
With due diligence.
And Commissioner Short, before I go to you, for the new land board members, we have done some exchanges in the last few years where Benewah County has been a loser. In essence, we've taken private land and made it state land. And in my mind, even though we have a constitutional obligation to do each one of these an arm's length transaction, if I got my druthers between helping a county that we've taken property away from them, I'm going to default to that because the Benewah County has been a loser in built 2 of our last land exchanges, I think.
That's correct, Governor. Well, acquisitions, Governor. too.
Yeah, in our
Significant
acquisitions.
Yeah.
So Commissioner Short, do you want to briefly add anything?
Yes, Governor. Currently, the property that we're talking about trading to the state, we haven't collected any taxes on it since 1943. And the county has no rock pits of their own. We're trying to correct that and also help the Saddle Club with their lease and that type of thing so people can use that property.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions?
For motion, Governor?
Yes.
So I'm a couple of things. I move to authorize IDL to proceed with due diligence on the Benewah County land exchange. And I guess just given what Commissioner Short, and as a county person, I appreciate your comments, Governor. But if there's in the balancing that needs to be pursued, certainly as a member here, I would favor us acquiring more land than less in that balancing, even if that requires, some funding from the land bank in order to get the right balance. I want to make sure that the county is whole in this process, but I think that fits in with what Commissioner Short said, but whatever we can do to help facilitate what the county needs and to make sure that more land seems better for us in the long term.
Governor, I'll second that, but I also have some questions still before.
Go ahead and second it,
Discussion.
and you do your questions.
I'll second that, but I'd
All
like
right,
to.
go ahead, control.
Thank you, Governor. I don't know if this is for Zane or the department, but based on our previous agenda item dealing with minerals and leases, et cetera, is there any idea of how much we are earning off of the current leases of the rodeo grounds and then our rock quarry?
Zane, I think the notes say very little.
Very little. I
Okay,
think we're in the $500 or $600 per year range for both of those. So we might be, it might be $1,000 or $1,200 a year.
But
for
but
those.
controller, to your question, in the due diligence, I assume without having to do a bunch of drilling, et cetera, that will be part of the valuation of what the potential is there. Is that correct?
That is correct,
Okay.
Governor.
thank you.
That answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
All right. We moved and seconded. Further questions? All in favor, say aye.
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 Hey, the ayes have it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Governor, that brings us to item number 3 on the regular agenda, which is a rulemaking issue or rulemaking for the, actually applies to the Board of Land Commissioners, and Scott Phillips will present this item.
Morning, Governor, Land Board members. I'm Scott Phillips, Policy and Communications Chief for the Idaho Department of Lands. Today, the department is seeking permission to begin the negotiated rulemaking for IDAPA 20-0101, Rules of Practice and Procedure before the State Board of Land Commissioner. This rule chapter governs the process for addressing contested cases before the Land Board. It's crucial for protecting citizens' due process rights. And per zero-based regulation, this chapter was originally scheduled to be repealed and replaced in 2022 and reviewed by the legislature this year. However, with the passage of House Bill 629 in 2022, which created the Idaho Office of Administrative Hearings, we postponed addressing this chapter until now. A draft timeline of our public outreach activities for this rulemaking is included in Appendix 1 of your briefing materials. It includes publishing our notice of intent to promulgate rules in the Idaho Administrative Bulletin, a public meeting be held in Boise and via Zoom, along with a 3-week public comment period. And like always, this rulemaking will be transparent and we will feature easy to find information about it on our website. We intend to bring this chapter back to the board in October with request to adopt the chapter that results from this effort as a pending rule. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Questions?
I have some questions.
Go ahead, General.
Thank you. So I'm just trying to understand this process a little bit. And is this the usual rulemaking process? Are we making amendments to the rulemaking process? Does the land board usually give you this much authority? I just want to understand all those things.
Mr. Phillips.
Governor, Attorney General Labrador, this is very consistent with how we've done rules in the past, sir. We routinely go to the board per the governor's zero-based regulation 5-year schedule. We review 20% of our rules. We have 19 rule chapters right now every year. We come to you seeking authorization to begin the negotiated process. We go through the public process and we bring the results of that process back to the board for adoption as a pending rule. So this is business as usual for us.
Perfect. Follow up during this rulemaking or this process right now, trying to assess, do my attorneys actually participate with you in this process? Because I would feel more comfortable if, for example, Scott Campbell and others are also helping with this, so we can look at the rulemaking process from the legal perspective.
Mr. Phillips.
Governor General Labrador, yes, our deputy attorney generals are part of the process. We started working with Angela Kaufman last year on understanding some of the sideboards of the board's authorities versus House Bill 629. And then we've also met with the staff from Idaho Office of Administrative Hearings, and then your attorneys will be part of our process as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Motion.
Governor, I have a question.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Superintendent.
Thank you. I understand the public comment requirement within the rulemaking process just a very brief outline. I would appreciate that from Scott on what that looks like from the land board perspective. I know how other agencies do that. I'm just curious on what that looks like with this group.
Mr. Phillips.
Governor, Superintendent Critchfield, if I understand your question correctly, as we enter the negotiated rulemaking process, we'll post information about the rulemaking on social media. We'll include information on our website. I believe we have some outreach list of interested parties that we maintain that we'll be emailing about the effort. We'll invite those folks to provide comment. We'll invite them to the public hearing that we hold, and then we'll review that information vis-a-vis the draft that we've developed and make changes that are appropriate to the draft of the rulemaking.
Thank you. A quick follow-up.
Go ahead.
Will those notes and I guess meeting summaries, will they be available to us as board members?
Mr. Phillips.
Governor, Superintendent, yes, they will. In fact, they'll be posted to our website for all citizens to review.
Thank you.
They are riveting.
Riveting. Save the most exciting for last.
Anything else?
Governor, for a motion.
Okay.
Governor, I move to authorize the department to initiate negotiated rulemaking.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Nay, the ayes have it. Thank you, Mr. Phillips.
Governor, that concludes the regular agenda today, and we can move into the consent agenda.
Okay, have at it.
Item number 4 is the Timber License Plate Fund and proposed expenditures from that, and that will be presented by Jennifer Okerlund, the Director of the Idaho Forest Products Commission.
Thank you,
Jennifer,
Deputy
welcome.
Director, Governor, members of the board. My name is Jennifer Okerlund, Director of the Idaho Forest Products Commission, and I'm here to speak to our request and use of the timber plate funds. The funds were set up in 1997 for the purposes of reforestation and education, and our request before you does both. So there's an outline, an itemized use of the funds, and I'd stand for any questions you might have.
Questions?
Governor.
Controller.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Jennifer. One thing in the past that we used to participate with the Forest Products Group, they used to have a kind of a political or new leaders tour as well. I noticed it was just the education one. Is there an opportunity for that in the future, or that went away, but is there an opportunity for that to come back, or did we lose the interest in that?
Jennifer.
Governor, Mr. Controller, thank you so much for that question. This year, very unfortunately, due to budget constraints, the commission, which typically puts on a very, very large opinion leader tour, was forced to remove that from our general budget, which offset our small request for use of the timber plate fund. We are hoping very much to bring that back in future years as our budget balances. And I believe we'll be working with the Department of Land, specifically Scott Phillips and his communications team, and helping them pull together a smaller tour for leaders this year.
Thank you. It was just a valuable thing for me when I first came on the board, and it was so helpful to learn all about, not just from the land board's perspective, but the whole forest products industry.
Thank you for that.
Okay. That with no questions. Thanks, Jennifer.
Okay, Governor, the next item on the consent agenda is a disclaimer of interest request on the Payette River, and we will have Mick Thomas, our Division Administrator over Minerals, Navigable Waters and Oil.
Mr. Thomas, welcome.
Good morning, Governor and members of the Land Board. Thank you for your time today. For the record, my name is Mick Thomas, Division Administrator over Minerals, Navigable Waterways, and Oil and Gas. Before I get into this, to answer a question that came up earlier, we do have, you're correct, Governor, 2.5 million acres of surface estate and approximately 3 million acres of mineral estate, just to set that aside. Thank you. I'm here this morning, though, officially to present the disclaimer of interest DI 600323, Horseshoe Bend School District number 73, former bed of the Payette River in Boise County, Idaho. For background, upon statehood, Idaho gained title to the beds and banks below the ordinary high water mark under the equal footings doctrine. These lands are held in trust for the benefit of the public. The Idaho State Land Board of Commissioners is the designated trustee of these lands. As the river channel changes through meandering and accretion, there's a through this natural process, the channel of the river moves. A disclaimer of interest enables the Idaho Department of Lands to clear the title to the accreted land. The Horseshoe Bend School District has applied for a disclaimer of interest for a parcel of accretion land totaling approximately 11.6 acres. The parcel A is located within the original survey meander line, as you can see up there, of the Payette River next to the applicant's deeded property. The Horseshoe Bend School District will grant the state a disclaimer of interest totaling 0.74 acres below the ordinary high water mark, parcel B, and a 0.89 acre, 25-foot access easement for public use along and adjacent to the ordinary high water mark of the Payette River. As part of the process, the department identified the ordinary high water mark, reviewed tax documents, the deed and survey, and conducted a field inspection. The subject property is in fact above the ordinary high water mark. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Superintendent.
Thank you. Noting or reading from the recommendation, is it usual, typical practice in this case where we're looking at doing business with the school district to charge them processing fees as we're one government to the same government? I know it's only $300, but nonetheless.
Mick?
Governor, Superintendent, yes, it is. We do not delineate the fee coverage between schools or private industry or anyone else in that way. There's an initial $300 application and then a subsequent $300 fee once the disclaimer is completed.
So it's a total of 600? I'm sorry, follow up for that.
But yes, but the rest of the story is if it costs more, the applicant has to pay more. So some of these that are more complicated are, and that's actually in the back of the board manual about the accreted lands and how we handle that. But it's in essence, $300 for the application, $300 for the finish. And then if the department has more expenses. So we are equal opportunity. We charge everybody the same.
Okay, all right. I'll reserve my thoughts and opinions on that for another time and day.
Governor,
Thank you.
Controller.
my question for Mick, does that give full public access easement to the southern end of the football field there that everyone can then score a touchdown? Or I'm trying to be on there.
Mick, I think the controller wants a free ticket to the football
We'll
games.
see what we could do. I don't have a lot of sway there. I would talk to the superintendent probably first and see what you.
All right.
I think it'll be a $300 ticket.
Yeah.
Uh,
Any other questions? All right. Thanks, Mick.
Thank you.
Governor and members of the land board, the last item on the consent agenda is the approval of the draft minutes, which are included under tab 6. And with that, the consent agenda would be ready for approval if you choose.
Governor,
Controller.
I move approval and adoption of the consent agenda.
Second.
Moved and seconded, we adopt the consent agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed,
Aye.
nay. The ayes have it.
Thank you, Governor. That brings us then to the department report starting on tab 7. And we begin with part A, which is the timber sales report. During February, the department did sell 7 endowment timber sales at auction, and 4 of those did have competitive bidding. And the net result was a 9% upbid over the appraised value across those sales. One item of note is that the final fiscal year 22 timber sale did sell successfully. And you'll recall that is the Wildcat Cedar timber sale, which had a fairly extensive road work package that does then, at the end of the day, provide access to a significant amount of endowment land to the north of that. So we're very happy to have that sale sold and get that project underway. And as I mentioned, that does complete fiscal 22 timber sale program. Moving into the first table, timber sale auctions, we did sell about 32 million board feet, and that brought in about $7.8 million with a price of about $242 per 1,000 board feet. One item of note there, the Democrat Ridge sale on the Clearwater area, you notice that's about 8.5 million board feet, so almost a little over a quarter of the volume. And the price on that was 165.98 per 1,000 board feet. So it appears to be a relatively low price. The reason for that is that was an overstory removal. So that was the second entry after a previous shelter wood where part of the value had already been removed from that area. So with lower volume per acre, we did get a lower price on that, which did influence our overall price for the month on our timber sales. Moving on to table number 2, the proposed timber sales for auction. We do have just under 39 million board feet proposed for auction during March, and the appraised value at just over $9 million. The 2 sales that were sold early this month did sell, and both had upbidding. And you'll get a detailed report next month, but the first one, Davies Glade Cedar, sold to IFG with some upbidding on that one. And Fool's Gold Ton in South Operations sold to Tamarack with upbidding on that one as well. So good results there early in the month. The bottom table is our volume under contract through the end of February. And you'll notice that we have 145 active contracts and a little over 462 million board feet under contract, and over $135 million in value of that timber, with an average price of $293 per thousand board feet. We have less volume under contract right now than the 3-year average, but a higher average price than we have had. And you'll see that volume under contract number change as the year progresses and we continue to implement our 23 sales plan and get those sales sold.
Governor, for a question.
Yep. Go
Just
ahead.
this is more of a learning moment for me. So I noticed, just compared to last month's board meeting, so we're down. So it's just, that means certain contracts were completed from last year.
Governor and Mr. Secretary, if the volume under contract did go down, that's correct. That would mean that sales had been closed.
Closed down. Okay. I assumed. I just want to make sure I'm following correctly.
It's effectively the net amount under contract.
Yep.
Governor and members of the board, turning to page 2, the top table shows our timber harvest receipts. In February, we brought in about $6.25 million. That brings our fiscal year to date to over $61.7 million. And we do project about $6.2 million in March for receipts. The middle table shows the status of the fiscal 23 timber sale program, and we have 209 million board feet that is either sold, advertised, or in our review process, and that is 64% of the fiscal 23 sales plan that is well underway. And looking over to the right side of that table, you'll see the number of polls with a goal of 20,000 polls. We're at about 89% of that target, and that just really reflects how many polls were in the individual sales that have made it through the process so far. So the poll's running a little bit ahead right now. Moving down to the graph at the bottom of the page, our cumulative harvest receipts, we are at 103% of the 3-year average and tracking right about along with fiscal 21 and 22. Our projected March receipts, if they come in as expected, which they should, would put us into that line in between the 2 orange lines, which are our forecast range for timber revenue at the start of the year. So we should be at the end of this month getting into that normal range. Then revenue will flatten out for a couple of months as we go through spring breakup, and then pick up again in June with typically another significant amount of revenue in June to close out the fiscal year. Moving to page 3, our cumulative harvest volume, we are at 98% of the 3-year average. So, tracking about where we would expect to be. The middle table, the monthly lumber and stumpage price. This graph shows 3 different things that are somewhat related, but really show different things. The green line, that shows lumber prices and shows the volatility that we've experienced over the last couple of years regarding lumber prices. And you'll see that price has essentially normalized now to where we would expect it to be. It's typically, as you look back through time, been more in that 400 to 600 range. I just looked this morning at some older data and it was there several years ago as well. So that's a more normal range for lumber prices right now. The blue line represents our 6-month average for stumpage prices. So a bit of a smooth line that takes out the volatility that you see in the red line. And the volatility of those individual sale results by month is dictated more by the quality of the sale, distance from the mill, the product that they're harvesting, whether it's a skyline harvest system or a ground-based system. Those are the factors that influence more than other things, influence the value of our sales on a month-to-month basis, is the characteristics of those particular sales. With that fiscal 20 6-month average, if you look back, we were at about $200 per thousand board feet. And you can see in 23, we're up to $303 per thousand board feet as a 6-month average. So And that the high 200s to around 300 represents a more historical average for looking back several years where our stumpage values would typically be. 200 in 19 and 20 was a relatively low period for us for stumpage. In terms of downside risk in the lumber markets right now, and then impacts on stumpage, higher mortgage rates and impacts on housing starts, single family housing in particular, present some risk to the industry and indirectly to the value of endowment timber. I noticed yesterday mortgage rates were down below 6 for the first time in a while. And I wouldn't begin to be able to predict where that may go next. But if the rates stay at a reasonable level and single family housing can continue to progress, then that mitigates some of that risk to the value of the endowment timber. With that, Governor, the next page 4 of the report shows the location of sales sold last month and proposed sales for March. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Bill, I don't need it now, but when would you have your timber beasts look at the inland composite lumber price and measure that to our species? Because if you see these up bids on cedar, if we've got a lot of cedar, we should be exceeding that, and just kind of how that our bogey that we're measuring against, how that matches up with our species composition. And you're, obviously distance from mills and high lead and the other things, but that might be the one, because if you see these high cedar sales compared to pine and fir, but we just a little report on that next month would be great.
Yeah, Governor.
Any other questions?
Cedar is a major driver for us, and we'll try to put some good data together for you.
Okay. And the other thing was with the plan, and maybe the controller can help me, the plan that was it 2 years ago that we implemented and hired new foresters to get more of the harvest done. How does that match up with a graph that shows that we're the same volume as we were 2 years ago before we added foresters to get more volume?
Governor and members of the land board, the board did approve our new forest asset management plan in 2019. The department had seen ahead of time that our harvest level, our recommended harvest level, was likely to go up, and we had started in 2 years before starting to incrementally ramp up to towards that new level. As we did the FAMP and brought that forward for land board approval, we are now in the implementation process of that, and we're in year 4 of the implementation of that FAMP, and we're at 326 million board feet that we're selling now. Next year, we go to 328 million board feet, and that would complete our implementation coincidentally just in time to start the process again and be in front of you. But it takes time for that. Each timber sale contract can have a period of 2 to 4 years. And so it takes time for that additional volume to move through the system and be realized as revenue.
The volume under contract should reflect that.
It should start coming up. And over time, we've had typically about 2 years of volume under contract, 2 years of our sale program under contract. And I would expect to see our volume under contract number increase over time as well.
Other questions? Continue.
Thank you, Governor. The next item is the report of endowment transactions. These are non-timber transactions, and you can see that the department completed 26 leases, permits, and assignments during February. And the lower part of that page shows real estate transactions by month, and you can see that there were no real estate. There's no real estate activity to discuss during February. Moving on to page 2. This shows the gross revenue, and this is non-timber revenue, both actual and forecasted through February of 2023, and it breaks it out by program. And you can see that we are at about $4.7 million to date. We do expect to get close to $6.3 million by the end of the year. One item of note there is that you can see the grazing revenue, current actual receipts at about 50,000, where we expect over 1.8 million. That has not even started to come in yet. We're just entering that season where those would be billed and paid. So we expect that revenue to come in, and that should move us up to that forecast amount.
I guess my one question is why, and it's for in the future, but actual receipts versus revenue expected. And then you've got the asterisk that said it's normal timing. Commercial military facilities are 8 times what we forecast. what are we not getting right with our forecasting? Almost all of them are off by 30 to 8 times.
Yeah, and Governor and members of the land board, it does vary a little bit by category, but speaking specifically about commercial military, we did have about 83,000 in land use permits for new uses and some other activities that began that we're now working to get under lease. So those new activities would not have been captured at that time in our forecast. So there's some variability there.
But do we know they're coming?
In most, it depends, Governor. Sometimes we know they're coming. If we know they're coming and we have relative certainty as to whether they're
Okay.
going to be realized, we would include them in the forecast.
Okay, very good.
I just have a kind of a stupid question, but in your investment report, you have some numbers in red, some in green. Typically, the red is negative, the green is positive, but that you're not doing that consistently. Is there a reason for that? In fact,
General, we'll get to that in a minute. We're going to have
Yeah.
the endowment. You're just
Yeah.
a page ahead of us.
yes, I am.
Thank you, Governor and members of the board. Moving to page 3, we do show a graph of the cumulative trust land program receipts. Again, this is the non-timber revenue. And you can see we're tracking right about consistent with the prior 3-year average, a little bit below 2022. And we'll watch that number toward that blue line, which is the target line for this fiscal year.Moving on to page 4, the cumulative, this is the permanent fund revenue and royalties. And this is tracking at a little over 1.6 million, tracking very close to the 3-year average. And note that about 2/3 of that does come from sand and gravel. And with that, Governor, I would stand for questions on that portion of the director's report.
Questions?
Governor,
Controller?
thank you, Governor, and Bill, maybe for you or for Mick, but last year we saw a lot of uptick on the sand and gravel. Seems like it's down a little bit this year. Is that just what the market's driving?
Governor and Mr. Controller, my understanding, last year was a very active year in the construction world and a lot of demand for use of that resource. And perhaps that has dipped a little bit this year.
Right.
Okay, Governor and members of the board, that brings us to the final part of the director's report. That is part C, which is the status of legislation monitored by the department. I'll just point out a couple of things there. Our rules, both our non-fee rules for timber and our fee rules for regulated to navigable waterways, have made it through the legislative process. The IDL budget, the supplemental appropriation for fiscal 23 has made it through the Senate and is in the House on 3rd reading, as I understand it. Moving down to the bottom item there, the appropriation for the Department of Lands for fiscal 24. That is, I believe, on 3rd reading in the Senate at this time. Moving to page 2, just a couple more items. The oil and gas legislation, HO 120. Has passed the House and is now in the Senate. And the S 1049, which provides for enforcement and protection of endowment lands, has passed both the Senate and the House. And with that, Governor, I could stand for questions.
Questions? Okay.
Okay, Governor, that brings us then to item number 8, which is the Endowment Fund Investment Board report. And instead of Chris Antone, we'll have Chris Halverson today.
Welcome, Mr. Halverson.
Good morning, Governor Little and land board members. Yes, as the governor mentioned, I'm filling in for Chris Anton, who's taking a well-needed vacation with his kids up in McCall. So hopefully he's out skiing, having fun. On Exhibit A, the monthly status report to the land board. For the month of February, the fund was down 2.1%, making our fiscal year return 5.8%. If you fast forward till yesterday, the markets, have been off a little bit in March, and so we're month to date number is minus 1.5%. Fiscal year to date return 4.25%. It's been the same kind of story up until mid-March on the markets. It's the Fed having to raise rates to combat inflation, stubbornly labor markets. So there's that balancing act of slowing the economy down to kind of wean inflation and keeping the economy positive still. So the Fed has been in there raising rates up until recently. As a matter of fact, during the month of February, we were up as almost at 4% on the 10-year treasury. That's kind of the gauge of the bond market. Inflation, like I mentioned, off a little bit in the month from 6.4 to 6%. So it's kind of the same. That's why I mentioned the same old story. We're still trying to fight inflation with higher interest rates and making that balancing act of not slowing the economy down into a recession. Well, those things all changed, as we all know. In March, we had a bit of a bank crisis, I guess you'd call it. The most notable one is Silicon Valley Bank in California. So just a quick reminder, banks take in deposits and then they loan out money. They hold a fraction of their money in reserve. So that money is there to offset loans when they go down in value. So a lot of loans lately have been written down, either they're real estate loans or they're other types of loans that have gone down in value. As loans go down in value, reserves have to go up at the bank. The other thing to keep in mind with banks lately is that we've been on this low interest rate environment for years and rates have just started going up. So for banks to make any kind of earnings, they've had a portfolio of long dated securities. A long treasury, a year or two ago was, yielding, 2% or something like that, pretty low, 2.5%. Now you can get, over 5%. So there's been a big shift in rates. This has really impacted banks. And the bank problem has been compounded by the frequency of valuation on their bank loan portfolios. So we look at our securities daily. They have to report, I think, their assets either quarterly or maybe even semi-annually. So they have a risk officer looking at this, but they report kind of on more frequent, interval than than you would think. So what's happened, Silicon Valley in particular went to receivership and they're going to sell off their assets. And for some bondholders, there'll be some recovery of funds. Silicon Valley Bank had some equity. They had a stock listing. For the endowment fund, we did have some Silicon Valley exposure in the equity market through index funds. So this is we have some passive index funds where we hold, in the case of Silicon Valley Bank, I think it was like 0.3% of the index, so a very small percentage. The common overall in our exposure to these banks from on equities is very small. I think the total is about $800,000. So pretty small. Well, actually, it's like $400,000. We had a $380,000 bond held by Western Asset Management for Silicon Valley Bank, and that currently is valued at about 50 cents on the dollar. So securities have been distressed in banks. I'll make a comment on the Credit Suisse situation in a moment, but after a week of kind of digesting the quality of the banks and the earnings and how strong the reserves are, bank stocks have already actually doing pretty well this week. So it's as if the crisis has passed, but there's been a lot more scrutiny on the finances and the reserves of banks. Lately, for example, back to the Silicon Valley example, they knew they were running into a crisis with reserves and they had lined up investors, but the investors at the last minute kind of backed up because they kind of saw the writing on the wall that this is not going to be a good situation. I mean, it's basically, there wasn't enough capital they could raise to keep the bank going. Skipping around a little bit, that's kind of what happened with Credit Suisse in Switzerland. They had investors lined up. I think they got an investment over the weekend, but it wasn't substantial enough to keep the bank afloat. So the Swiss government intervened and basically forced a merger of UBS Bank and Swiss Bank in Europe. For the endowment fund, so the Swiss Bank situation, we did not have any equity exposure to Swiss Bank, but it's interesting that the Swiss Bank shareholders actually are going to recover some of their assets. They have a fixed exchange rate of equity for equity. So each Swiss Bank shareholder is going to get 22.848 shares for each Credit Suisse, or 22.48 shares for each Credit Suisse Bank share held. So currently, each Credit Suisse share is worth about $1 a share. So it's really weird that the equity didn't get wiped out, but what got wiped out at Credit Suisse is what they call AT1 capital. That's additional paid in tier 1 capital. This is money that is deemed absorbable for losses. And they go to the capital markets to get this money, but it's deemed absorbable for losses. So that got totally wiped out. We do have Credit Suisse bonds, and those are all going to go to UBS. So our bond positions and that were with Credit Suisse are going to go over to UBS. So I think the last time I was at the land board, there was a different kind of financial crisis. I always get drawn the luck card or whatever, but I thought it'd be important to give you some little background information on what our exposure was there and kind of what's going to happen with the banks going forward. Attorney General Labrador asked about the green versus the red on Exhibit B. So the green versus the red, we measure our performance of the fund relative to benchmark. For example, in the current month, the total fund was up 2.1%, negative minus 2.1% for February, but the benchmark was minus 2.4. So when we beat the benchmark, the color goes green. And when we're behind the benchmark, the color goes red. So it's a quick way to just say green, yeah, good, we're doing really well, or red, there's, some performance issues.
We prefer green without a minus in front of it.
Exactly. Relative performance does not pay bills, as they say, but we've outperformed the benchmark. If you look at our longer term numbers, you can see they're solidly ahead of the benchmark. So I hope that answers your question.
That does. I just got ahead of myself, but thank you.
You're welcome.
Besides State Street, who does our fixed income? Does your fixed income?
Yeah, so we have two types of fixed income management throughout our portfolios. So just a reminder for the land board members, we also advise the funds of the state insurance fund. The state insurance fund is a combination of both passive fixed income index funds, then they have some active fixed income as well. In areas of securitized credit, which would be like mortgages and credit card receivables and things like that, and then just passive index funds. So for us, we have a little bit of both. Our active managers are Western Asset Management in California and Double Line. I think many of you may have seen Jeffrey Gunlock. He's a very prominent, they call him the Bond King. That's our firm Double Line that manages securities for us. So you'll see him on TV. And then we do have some money at State Street, passively managed. Our total fixed income is, if you can see on Exhibit B, in the about 3/4 of the way down, we have about $645 million in fixed income. About a third of that is in passive and the rest of it is active.
And just a quick follow-up.
Yep, General.
You explained this a little bit, but so what is exactly our exposure on bank holdings right now?
Our current exposure, existing exposure, is we've got about $3 million of Credit Suisse bonds, which will go to UBS, and those should be money good. Those are fine.
Mm-hmm.
On the banks that have either gone into receivership or closely there, like Silicon Valley Bank, last week I mentioned about, it was about $830,000. Most of the equity positions have been sold. So we're going to unfortunately have to take a market value loss on our equities. The bonds, which are 380,000 par, are worth about half of that. And then it's up to that is in an account that's an active manager. So the manager will take discretion on when to dispose of those assets, which will favor us the best.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Governor, I don't know who to relay. You can relay this on. I just had to chuckle when I was looking at the report. So last month I asked about the comparing to our benchmark on real estate.
Yes.
And this month I noticed we just got rid of the benchmark on real estate. That seems like a solution, but maybe not the long-term best solution. So I'm wondering if we'll get a new benchmark.
So I'm glad you brought that to my attention. So the problem with real estate is it's valued once a quarter.
Okay.
So for example, and everything works with the lag. So sometimes it's almost a quarter behind. We also measure real estate to a benchmark, but the benchmark data is available pretty fast. So there's a lag time difference, which could be up to a quarter between the benchmarks and the actual manager performance. So when we had that in the report last month, it was actually a quarter behind manager return with the current benchmark. So it looked really bad. And it's not a fair comparison of apples to apples. So we thought when the benchmark numbers are solid and reportable, we'll put them back into the report, which will probably be next month, because by the March report, all the numbers will be in. So we can then put that index numbers and the performance from the managers in the report. Now, there is something developing in real estate in that a lot of real estate funds are now getting valued once a month. So I'm guessing that the indexes are going to have to keep up with the managers, and those valuations will become more timely and not have these lagged effects. And this is also a big issue with private equity as well. If you see in portfolios, private equity, which is even worse because that's almost valued on, when they do a deal. So they're not very good comps out there for evaluation. So we're doing our best we can there, but we didn't want to unfairly portray, the situation with those lags. The other thing is on this report, we take all of our data from our custodian. Our custodian, Northern Trust, is the official book and record of all of our assets. The valuations and the performance are all reported from Northern Trust. So we don't want to we just put some number in there. We don't want to do that. We want to use the official numbers from our custodian, Northern Trust.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Governor and members of the land board, that concludes the reports, the monthly reports for March. That brings us to the information agenda. There are 3 items on there. The first one is the 2024 grazing lease rate, and that will be presented by Jason Laney, Section Manager for Real Estate and Leasing.
Good morning, Governor, members of the land board. For the record, my name is Jason Laney. I'm the leasing section manager in the Real Estate Services Bureau. And today I'm presenting information regarding the calculation of the 2024 grazing lease rate. So the 1993 formula, as approved by the land board, uses 4 USDA reported indices to approximate the value of endowment forage. These indices are the private lease rate in Idaho, prices received for beef cattle, forage prices in the 11 Western states, and the price of inputs to produce beef cattle. And so based on the most recent indices reported, the grazing rate for 2024 will be $6.56 in AUM. That's a 10% or 72-cent decrease from the current rate of $7.28 per AUM. The formula can be found in attachment 1 of your memo. The rate decrease is primarily due to a significant increase in the prices paid index, which went up about 30%. Grazing lessees will be notified of the new rate at least 6 months prior to the 2024 grazing billing cycle. The grazing rate formula also states that the 12-month average land price, that if the 12-month average land price is less than or equal to 70% for the price of calves, that the sheep rate will be reduced by 25%. Price data will be reviewed in October to determine if a reduction is necessary. However, current trends indicate that we will not be creating a reduction for sheep AUMs. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Governor, so I've been told, obviously I'm new to dealing with these leases, that there's to a degree a lag related to the market to how our calculation based on the 1993 formula operates. I mean, you can appreciate the struggle here when we see inflation rising dramatically in every sector. And here we are seeing a decrease in our lease rates, which just causes cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. Governor and Secretary McGrain, I agree with that assessment. The lag time is primarily due to, so the numbers, the indices that we're using are actually from 2022 USDA reports. So, I mean, there is some, I think,
but not too much. I mean, that makes sense.
Captured in those numbers. And then part of the reason we have that lag time as well is we have a mandate in rule that we are to notify lessees within 6 months of a rate increase. And so those 2 factors result in a 2-year lag in our grazing rate.
General.
So again, I'm also new. So explain to me why a prices paid index increase results in a lower price in.
Governor, General Labrador, that's another great question. It's how the formula is structured. So an increase in the prices paid in index will actually decrease that rate. Cattle prices and forage prices will increase the rate. And it's just how it was set up. Unfortunately, an increase in the prices paid index is more heavily weighted. And so even if we see a significant increase in cattle prices, it sometimes doesn't offset the prices paid index when prices really go up.
Okay.
I know it's not an apples to apples comparison, so I'll just preface that, but I mean, exactly what the Attorney General pointed out, I'm assuming we don't see that with private leases, like when someone's grazing on private ground, that it wouldn't decrease in this type of circumstance, would it?
Governor.
I don't know, Governor, you might know a lot better than anybody else
I
here.
might know something about
You might know something about this.
Yeah, Governor, Secretary McGrain, we do have pretty solid private lease rate numbers that are reported by the USDA every year. They're actually self-reported by folks that graze. And so that's in a survey that's sent out annually. And what we've seen is that the private lease rate steadily ticks up or stays pretty stable year to year. So for example, in 2022, it was $19 per AUM. That's what it was in 21. I think it was $18.50 in 2020. So we do see a steady increase or
More matching what we would expect it to be doing.
correct.
Yeah.
Further questions? Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Governor and members of the land board, the second item on the information agenda has to do with a potential delegation of authority related to disclaimers. And we'll bring Mick Thomas back up to discuss this.
Hello again. For the record, Governor, members of the land board, my name is Mick Thomas, Division Administrator over Minerals, Nav Waters, and Oil and Gas. I'm here to discuss the delegation of authority of disclaimers of interest. For the sake of brevity, I won't repeat the land board's authority over the navigable waterways of the state. As you may know, the volume of disclaimer requests for landowners has risen. Current land board policy requires these disclaimers to be presented as consent agenda items, as you've seen today. To improve efficiencies, the department worked with the Attorney General's office to determine if disclaimers could be processed without land board action. Idaho Code 58-119-1 provides the land board could delegate its authority regarding disclaimers to the department. Further, Idaho Code 58-119A clarifies the authority of the department to issue disclaimers without obtaining formal approval from the land board by entering into an agreement with the owner of the adjacent land in exchange for a reservation of public use right-of-way along the river. The public use right-of-way would have a width of 25 feet. In the revised process, the department would continue the current research and field inspection. The department would use its website to maintain appropriate transparencies and coordinate the disclaimer process to allow public access to right-of-way where possible. Rather than presenting each disclaimer to the land board, the director would approve or deny each disclaimer unless the proposed use right-of-way is less than or greater than the 25 feet easement, in which case land board approval would be required. The director may also seek land board approval if it is determined that the circumstances surrounding a disclaimer of interest warrant such action. These circumstances could include if there's existing structure or non-agriculture in the proposed disclaimer area, or if IDL has received public inquiries or media questions regarding the proposed disclaimer. Brief with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions?
Mick, is it necessary, I guess, based on the legal review for when the proposed right-of-way is greater than 25 feet for, I mean, I can tell you from my perspective, it seems fine if we're going to have a greater right-of-way.
Mr. Thomas.
I think Governor, Secretary McGrain, you are correct. Anything outside of the 25 foot
does require
land board approval.
Okay.
For the question,
Governor.
Control.
Governor, back in 2014, we did something similar with timber sales. All the timber sales used to come before the land board, and we set up a criteria that the department, if there's certain circumstances or criteria, there are thresholds that were met, then they needed to bring those before the board. And I like this concept of being able to bring, if there's certain criteria or circumstances that would meet that, then they would need to come before.
Further questions?
Governor, Mr. Thomas, more just for educational, why the increase in disclaimers of interest? I mean, obviously we have a ton of them out there, but just
Real estate's worth more money.
okay.
Yeah, Governor, Secretary, Governor Little nailed it. There's a lot more real estate activity now in Idaho. And as people want to sell that property, they realize there's a clouded title and they want to resolve it.
Got it. Okay. And then more just for education on my part, I follow the disclaimer of interest in the navigable waterways. Do we run into situations, or what happens in the event that the waterway moves? And is there ever like a taking that does the state acquire, if the waterway shifts such that it consumes private land, what happens in the inverse, I guess?
You are,
Thomas.
Governor, Secretary McGrain, you're correct. Normally, if the channel moves, there's give and take. Accretion is unpredictable, but it takes a while. In this
Sure.
case, there's a significant amount of property that, 11 acres or so, that became upland. But often with disclaimers, there's a give and take where we've gained some property. We would gain some property on the other side of the river, for example.
Okay.
We get another 3 feet of snow, we might see some of that. Okay, thanks, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you.
Okay, Governor, members of the land board, that brings us to the final item on the agenda, again, an information item, and that is regarding an update on the master fire agreement. And we do have our state forester, Craig Foss, here to present.
Mr. Foss, welcome.
Good morning, Governor, members of the land board. For the record, my name is Craig Foss. I'm the state forester and also the division administrator for forestry and fire with the Department of Lands. The Idaho Master Fire Agreement is the framework that defines how participating state and federal agencies will cooperate for wildfire preparedness and suppression across the state of Idaho. This morning, I just want to provide a brief summary of the key components of the negotiated agreement that we are preparing to sign. The master agreement between the Department of Lands and the federal agencies, and that includes the Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, the National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. This master agreement is negotiated every 5 years. The current agreement expired in December of 2021. We operated through 2022 under a 1-year extension. In December of 22, we signed another 4-month extension, which expires the end of April of 2023. So as I indicated, the master agreement really outlines how we're going to work together to provide wildfire response in Idaho. There's 3 overarching methodologies that we follow. Those methodologies include offset protection, fully reimbursable, and mutual aid protection. Those different protection mechanisms are defined in your memo, and so I won't take the time to go through those here, but if there are questions, I'll be glad to take those. For discussion, we've been meeting for more than 2 years, the Department of Lands and the federal partners, to work on negotiating this new master agreement. In September of last year, we came together for 5 days here in Boise, and we were finally able to hammer out what we felt was an acceptable agreement for the state of Idaho as well as for the federal agencies. Our program in Idaho for the Department of Lands has been adding resources over the past 3 years. This current legislative session is year 3. What we've added that's significant this year that we really feel will take us to where we need to be with regard to implementing this proposed new agreement is standing up the Cottonwood Forest Protective District in eastern Idaho, as well as funding for 5 strategic engine modules that we'll be able to locate across the state of Idaho. Just a few of the key components of this proposed agreement. It provides a move to align areas that are protected more with agency missions. For example, more of the federal lands, the Forest Service lands, will be backcountry, which is where they tend to own their land. Bureau of Land Management will tend to focus more on range, and the Idaho Department of Lands and our timber protective associations will focus on state and private timberland, as well as the wildland urban interface. Most large blocks of industrial timber ground are going to continue to be protected by IDL or the timber protective associations. The only exception is where we have blocks of those land that are surrounded by federal lands and they're located a significant distance from our resources, then they will continue to be an offset protection. Something that's more significant with this agreement is there's a larger mutual aid component, which we've changed the billing threshold to where we feel it'll maximize fire response and reduce the amount of billings that are needed for wildfire response. I guess I just want to emphasize when there's a fire start in Idaho, that fire start's called into a dispatch center, and that dispatch center has predetermined run cards based on location of resources. That's not changing. And so the response that we see across the state of Idaho should not change. It just where that fire starts indicates who's going to be billed for that fire. And so that's the change that they're working on incorporating. So in summary, IDL and the federal agencies have been meeting with our field staff and the dispatch centers over the last number of months to begin planning the necessary changes required to implement this new agreement. IDL has also met with our forest industry partners to discuss the proposed changes. We really, all parties involved do believe that the proposed master agreement allows for better mission alignment of all the partners involved. The operating plan within the master agreement can be amended annually. That is critical flexibility. That has always been there and that will continue to be there. So with that leadership from the Department of Lands, Forest Service, and the Bureau of Land Management agree that we will sign this new agreement by April 30th of 2023 and begin implementing the new plan this fire season. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Questions?
Mr. Frost, just to confirm kind of your closing there. So it seems like you pretty much are at a meeting of the minds. You're just ironing out the final details. And so for the next 5 years, we should, after your 2 years of negotiation, we're finally here.
Mr. Foss.
Governor, Secretary McGrain, that is absolutely correct. This will be a 5-year agreement from the date of signing.
Mr. Foss, if when we do some of this swaps, have we got chunks of real estate in Idaho where previously the Department of Lands, your fire people were in charge of initial attack, that the Forest Service is going to be in charge of initial attack and they may decide we're going to let the fire burn? What's our risk there?
Governor, members of the Land Board, appreciate that question. Yeah, there are definitely are in this proposed agreement areas where we had been protecting federal lands through offset. Now those lands will go back under federal protection. That's a conversation that we had intensely through our negotiations process. And it is my understanding that is certainly they're well aware of the different land ownerships around their lands. And while they do have areas where they do have special management objectives, it is certainly our expectation that there will be aggressive initial attack.
Mr. Foss, what other states don't have a final agreement with the U.S. Forest Service?
Governor, members of the Land Board, as I've indicated, this is a 5-year agreement. Different states are in different stages. It's my understanding that Montana was also negotiating their master agreement and theirs has been signed. I know that Oregon is going to be moving into that negotiation process. I'm not sure where they're at in the process.
But if I'm correct, we're the only state, we're the last state to enter into this granular of an agreement with our Forest Service neighbors.
With Governor, members of the Land Board, with respect to the regions that we're in, Region 1 and Region 4, that is correct.
And Mr. Foss, do we think when the department comes to the Land Board about their next budget recommendation that we're going to have to deploy more resources to cover this added real estate that we're going to have, that we're going to be responsible for?
Governor Little, members of the Land Board, after the 2015 fire season, which was really a bad fire season, we were given money to conduct an analysis of our fire program. And that analysis, and what we indicated was we would hold off on requesting additional resources for our program until we had that analysis. Once we got that analysis, we put together a series of requests. This year is the final year of those requests. Our goal is to implement everything that we've been given over the past 3 years and then conduct another analysis of our program in another couple of years And then based on that analysis, bring forward new requests. But our intent is not to continue to bring forward large requests to the land board and the legislature in the near future.
I'll hold you to that.
That's our hope.
Further questions? I do want to add, Director Miller and I have been really involved in this, and I have been pleasantly surprised by the chief of the Forest Service willingness. They gave us an extension. I think they did get their people to the table to try and get this negotiated. There's been Herculean efforts. Initially, it looked like they were just going to take the map and say, we're going to do this and you're going to do that. And we were going to have fire trucks, Forest Service fire trucks going this way and state fire trucks going this way, passing each other, going to a fire. The good work that the department did with the Forest Service is going to, for the most part, we're not going to have that issue that would have had you all not done your good work. So,
Agreed.
all right.
Thank you.
Governor, members
thanks.
of the land board, that is the final item, and we have completed the agenda today.
There's only one item left.
Motion to adjourn.
There you go. It's been moved, we adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Nate, the ayes have it. We are adjourned.